Imagine you are a Roman senator strolling through Suburra, Rome's infamous pleasure district, when suddenly you notice a familiar figure tending to clients in a common brothel. Your blood runs cold as you recognize delicate facial features beneath cheap makeup. She is no ordinary prostitute. It is Valeria Messalina, Empress of Rome, wife of Emperor Claudius, voluntarily debasing herself for the thrill of anonymous encounters with the city's lowliest citizens. She was not a desperate woman forced into prostitution. She was the most powerful woman in the Roman Empire, sneaking out of the palace at night to compete with common prostitutes determined to prove she could outdo any woman in sexual stamina. Do you think you know everything about Roman decadence? What you are about to discover about Messalina will make Caligula seem like a choir boy. Because Rome's third empress did not merely abuse her power, she weaponized her sexuality in a way that horrified the empire and ultimately sealed her own terrible fate. In the year 38 AD, Rome celebrated what seemed like a perfect imperial wedding. Valeria Messalina, only 15 years old, married Emperor Claudius in a ceremony that symbolized everything Romans valued: nobility, fertility, and the continuation of divine bloodlines. She was everything an empress should be: young, beautiful from an ancient patrician family, and capable of providing legitimate heirs to the empire. Claudius, 13 years her senior and physically impaired by what modern medicine identifies as cerebral palsy, seemed grateful to have won such a prize. Contemporary accounts describe Messalina as possessing classic Roman beauty, pale skin, golden hair, and refined features that betrayed her aristocratic origins. She fulfilled her imperial duties perfectly, giving birth to two of Claudius's children and attending official ceremonies with the appropriate dignity. Roman society operated under strict moral codes that divided women into rigid categories. Virtuous wives and mothers occupied the highest tier, while prostitutes and entertainers were at the bottom of the social hierarchy. An empress was expected to embody feminine virtue so perfectly that even rumors of improper conduct could destabilize the government. The contrast between public expectations and private reality made Messalina's behavior not only scandalous, but genuinely dangerous to the empire's stability. Yet behind the marble walls of the Palatine Palace, something far darker was unfolding. The young woman who smiled gracefully during religious ceremonies and hosted dignified banquets was secretly planning nocturnal adventures that would shock even the most jaded Roman aristocrats who thought they had seen every kind of excess. The transformation began subtly in the first year of her reign as empress, when palace servants noticed strange changes in her behavior. She dismissed guards at unusual hours, claiming fatigue, and then left her quarters in simple clothing that concealed her identity. At first, her nocturnal escapades seemed like innocent rebellion, a young woman seeking adventure outside the stifling protocols of palace life. But Messalina's escapades soon escalated from innocent escape to something far more calculated and disturbing. She began studying the habits of Roman prostitutes, learning their techniques, territories, and clients. This was no casual observation. She researched with the methodical precision of a military campaign. The first documented incident occurred during the Saturnalia festival in 40 AD, when traditional social roles were temporarily reversed and moral restrictions were relaxed. While Claudius attended religious ceremonies, Messalina disguised herself as a common citizen and headed to the Suburra district. What began as curiosity about the lives of ordinary Romans turned into an obsession with proving her sexual superiority over professional sex workers. The contemporary historian Tacitus recorded whispered accounts from palace informants who uncovered Messalina's deception. She contacted the manager of a brothel, offering to work anonymously for one night. The owner, unaware of her true identity, agreed, thinking she was an aristocrat seeking thrills. However, Messalina's performance that night surpassed anything the establishment had ever seen. She serviced more clients than the most experienced workers, displaying an appetite that shocked even professionals accustomed to extreme demands. As dawn approached and the other prostitutes stopped working, Messalina refused to leave. She demanded more clients, more challenges, more opportunities to prove an empress could outdo any common prostitute. Eventually, the manager forced her to leave, but the damage was done. Messalina had discovered her true calling. In the months following her first brothel experience, Messalina developed a systematic approach to her nocturnal activities, revealing a calculating mind behind her apparent madness. She created a network of trusted servants who smuggled her out of the palace, arranged disguises that completely transformed her appearance, and crafted false identities that allowed her to move freely in Rome's underground sexual economy. However, mere prostitution was not enough to satisfy her competitive nature. She began organizing competitions between herself and Rome's most famous courtesans, wagering enormous sums on her ability to service more clients in a single night than any professional. These contests were not private affairs. They drew audiences of wealthy Romans who gathered to watch their empress debase herself for entertainment. The most infamous of these contests occurred in 41 AD, when Messalina challenged Scylla, Rome's most renowned prostitute, in a test of endurance. The rules were simple. The woman who serviced the most clients from dusk to dawn would win a fortune in gold. Rome's nobility filled the venue, placing bets as they watched the emperor's wife compete like a gladiator in an arena of carnality. Scylla, a professional with years of experience, carefully managed her energy throughout the night, using techniques to handle clients efficiently. By dawn, she had serviced 25 clients and declared herself exhausted but victorious. Messalina was just getting started. Even after Scylla conceded defeat, the empress continued receiving clients, driven by a compulsion that went far beyond mere sexual appetite. Historical accounts suggest she serviced over 30 men that night, stopping only when there were no more volunteers. Her victory was not celebrated. It was observed in horrified silence by Romans who realized they were witnessing something unprecedented and deeply disturbing. The psychological implications were staggering. She was not a desperate woman forced into humiliating circumstances. She was the most powerful woman in the world, choosing humiliation as entertainment. Messalina discovered that her imperial status made degradation more thrilling, not less. The greater the contrast between her public dignity and private debasement, the greater her satisfaction. But these public contests were only the beginning of her descent into a systematic perversion that ultimately threatened the stability of the entire Roman government. If you think Messalina's prostitution contests were shocking, you are not prepared for what happened when she decided to make her sexual obsessions permanent. What I am about to describe will make everything you've heard seem like an innocent experiment compared to the systematic operation she planned. Before moving to the most disturbing part, to subscribe and give a like if you can handle what's coming, and make sure to comment below to let us know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that people from all over the world are connected by the same curiosity about the darkest corners of human history. The next phase transformed the Empress of Rome into something far more dangerous than a sexual rival. In 42 AD, Messalina crossed a line that turned her from a scandalous empress into a genuine threat to the empire's security. She created what historians later called the boldest criminal enterprise in Roman history, an exclusive brothel operating under imperial protection, staffed by aristocrats and catering to the city's most powerful men. The operation was hidden in plain sight in a luxurious villa near the marshes of the Campus Martius, disguised as a private club for elite social gatherings. Messalina used her imperial authority to recruit participants, essentially blackmailing noblewomen into joining her enterprise under the threat of political or financial ruin for their families. What appeared to be voluntary participation was in reality coercion backed by the full power of the imperial throne. Messalina's criminal genius lay in her selection of clients. Instead of servicing random clients like common prostitutes, she deliberately chose senators, military commanders, and wealthy merchants who possessed valuable information for the empire's interests. Each encounter was documented by hidden servants who recorded conversations, identified weaknesses, and gathered information Messalina could later use for political manipulation. The empress essentially created a honeypot operation that made her one of the best-informed individuals in the Roman Empire. She knew which senators planned to oppose imperial policies, which military commanders harbored traitorous thoughts, and which merchants were evading taxes or smuggling goods. This intelligence network gave Messalina unprecedented power over the individuals meant to govern the empire alongside her husband. Her methods were sophisticated and psychologically devastating. She observed her targets during official ceremonies and then arranged invitations to exclusive parties at her villa. Once inside, guests were treated to increasingly exotic entertainments, culminating in encounters with aristocrats whose identities were revealed only after compromising acts were committed and documented. The psychological impact on the victims was calculated and cruel. Discovering they had unknowingly interacted with the empress herself or the wives and daughters of their political allies created layers of blackmail that ensured absolute silence and obedience. Messalina transformed sexual shame into political control, creating a network of compromised officials who dared not oppose her wishes. The most disturbing aspect of her operation was how it corrupted the fundamental relationships that held Roman society together. She forced aristocrats to betray their class, compelled political leaders to act against their principles, and turned the sacred bonds of marriage and family into tools of manipulation and control. Foreign ambassadors began reporting strange irregularities in Roman political decisions that seemed to favor specific individuals without logical explanation. Military appointments fell to unqualified candidates who somehow earned the empress's favor. Trade deals benefited merchants with no apparent connection to the empire's interests. The empire's decision-making process was subtly undermined by a brothel madam who happened to be the emperor's wife. Even this systematic corruption was nothing compared to what happened when Messalina decided that operating in secret was no longer thrilling enough. By 43 AD, her appetite for power and perversion had grown beyond what any covert operation could satisfy. She began organizing elaborate public orgies that served as both entertainment and political theater, forcing Rome's elites to participate in humiliating spectacles that reinforced her control over the empire's leaders. These events were not spontaneous parties but carefully orchestrated displays of imperial power disguised as religious festivals. Messalina claimed to honor various gods and goddesses, demanding the attendance of senators, their wives, and other high officials under the pretext of fulfilling civic duties. What began as formal religious rites gradually transformed into scenes of systematic sexual humiliation. The empress developed techniques to escalate these ceremonies gradually into something far more sinister. She started with traditional rituals and then introduced increasingly intimate elements, claiming they were authentic ancient practices. By the time participants realized what was happening, they were too compromised to resist without admitting their own involvement in activities that violated every principle of Roman morality. Messalina's psychological manipulation reached its peak during these events. She understood that forcing aristocratic men and women to humiliate themselves publicly created bonds of shared shame that prevented them from opposing her power later. Everyone who participated became complicit in maintaining the fiction that these gatherings were legitimate religious rites, not imperial sex parties. The most horrifying accounts describe Messalina forcing political rivals to perform with each other while she watched and commented. Senators who opposed imperial policies found themselves naked and humiliated before their peers, their dignity destroyed, and their authority permanently undermined. She discovered that sexual humiliation was more effective than execution for neutralizing political opposition. Yet the most disturbing aspect was how Messalina began including younger participants in these events. Palace records suggest she recruited teenage sons and daughters from prominent families claiming their participation was necessary for religious authenticity. These young individuals, raised to obey imperial authority without question, became unwilling participants in their own exploitation. The empress created a system where opposing her required admitting involvement in activities that would destroy entire family lines. Parents could not protect their children without admitting their own complicity. Political leaders could not expose her crimes without revealing their own involvement. In essence, she made herself untouchable through systematic blackmail that encompassed the entire Roman ruling class. Foreign observers began noticing odd behavior in Roman officials during diplomatic negotiations. Previously, confident senators seemed nervous and submissive. Military commanders appeared distracted and fearful. The empire's leadership was psychologically broken by an empress who understood that sexual shame was more powerful than military force in controlling human behavior. In 48 AD, Messalina's obsession with power and scandal reached its final expression when she committed an act so unprecedented that it shocked even Romans accustomed to imperial excesses. While Emperor Claudius was in Ostia overseeing grain shipments, Messalina orchestrated a full wedding ceremony with Gaius Silius, a young and handsome senator she had seduced for months. It was not a secret romance or symbolic ritual. It was a legal Roman marriage complete with religious ceremonies, official witnesses, and formal contracts. Messalina, in essence, declared herself divorced from the emperor and remarried another man while still holding the title of empress. The legal and political implications were staggering, as Roman law recognized her new marriage as legitimate while she remained Claudius's wife. The wedding celebration turned into a multi-day orgy that engulfed much of Rome's still uncorrupted aristocracy, forcing even her most compromised allies to admit that Messalina had moved into open rebellion against imperial authority. She stopped pretending her actions were private pleasures or religious rites. It was a direct challenge to the emperor's authority and the stability of the empire itself. Messalina's state of mind during this period suggests a complete disconnect from reality. She began referring to Silius as emperor and herself as his empress, apparently believing she could simply replace Claudius through the force of her will and the submission of her blackmailed victims. She started issuing orders in Silius's name and planning a formal coronation ceremony to legitimize their rule. The young senator, initially flattered by the empress's attention, found himself trapped in a nightmare of imperial ambitions and sexual obsession. He became the centerpiece of Messalina's final fantasy, not just sexual domination, but a complete political transformation of the Roman Empire, according to her perverted vision. Historical accounts suggest he began planning ways to escape, realizing too late that he had become a pawn in her deadly game. Meanwhile, Claudius remained unaware of his wife's marriage until loyal freedmen risked their lives to inform him of the crisis. The emperor's initial reaction was disbelief. Even for Messalina, bigamy, while holding imperial office, seemed impossible. However, as evidence mounted, including witness testimonies and official documents, Claudius realized he faced not only personal betrayal, but a potential civil war. The confrontation came swiftly and brutally. Claudius returned to Rome with loyal troops and confronted Messalina in the gardens where she was celebrating her new marriage. Contemporary accounts describe her final moments as a mix of defiance and terror. When she realized her network of blackmail and sexual control had met a force stronger than shame, the imperial instinct for survival, her fate was sealed. Messalina's execution was swift, but her eradication was systematic. Claudius ordered her name erased from all public monuments, her images destroyed, and her memory condemned through damnatio memoriae, an official oblivion that made speaking of her existence treasonous. The empress, who used sexual power to control an empire, was in turn controlled by the ultimate expression of state power. Her death marked the end of an era where sexual scandals nearly replaced political competition as the driving force of imperial governance. If this exploration of the darkest manifestations of power has left you wondering what other hidden truths lurk in the shadows of history, click the video on your screen to uncover the next shocking chapter that authorities tried to erase. Subscribe to keep exploring the terrifying realities hiding behind civilization's most carefully constructed lies.